Good evening. I'm going to call this meeting to order exactly at 6 o'clock and want to welcome those that are here in person and those that may be joining us virtually. This is a joint committee between Human Services and Housing in the Senate. And hopefully it makes sense to you, the why. But what I will say is we talk a lot about DD and ID, and we talk a lot about people in one room, and then we go to another room and we talk about brick and mortar, and we talk about the buildings that they live in, but never the tween shall meet. So this is an opportunity for us to be in the same room to talk not only about those who may know about and be folks that are having lived experience and that are impacted by the decisions we make, but also having an opportunity for those that are trying to create those safe spaces for folks to live, to hear from people themselves. And I think sometimes we don't traditionally do things together, but I think we do better when we talk about that and when we can have these kind of joint conversations. So you will see kind of a slim group, but a good group here who cares deeply about this content. And just remember, if there are members of our committees that are not here, everything's on TVW. And so people do take the time and spend the time to listen to not only the work sessions, but also the testimony that comes in front of us. So with that, I want to make sure we have our entire time because we have a tight schedule, and we have a work session we're going to do to start with, and then we're going to end with a public hearing on 3 bills, and we will be out of here at 8 o'clock, we promise you, if not before. So want to hold people to their time, and we'll be very gracious as we do that, but want to make sure we have a time to hear from everyone. And so with that, I am going to first say that my name is Claire Wilson and I chair the Human Services Committee in the Senate. And I am going to pass this over to my colleague who chairs the Housing Committee, and we're going to start. So Senator Kuderer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am Senator Patty Kuderer. I chair the Housing Committee, and Senator Wilson is absolutely correct. There's a lot of issues that intersect between our committees, and that's why we're holding this joint meeting tonight. So we're going to start right in. We're going to start with an overview of housing provided to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So we're going to start with the Department of Commerce. Dave Pringle is here, and Nate Lichty is virtual, and on deck is Mark Coate, who's the Executive Director of Parkview Services. So Mark, just zoom in and hang tight, and we'll get to you. And Dave, please begin.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair Kuderer, and thank you, Chair Wilson, for inviting us to this joint meeting of your two committees. And as you're both spot on, that there's a lot of intersection between the buildings that we build and the people that we serve within those in the state of Washington. So again, I'm Dave Pringle with the Department of Commerce on our Government Affairs team, and Nate Lichty is with me. He manages the Housing Trust Fund unit and Multifamily Housing Finance unit. Next slide, please. So the Department of Commerce strengthens communities in a lot of different ways from both, maybe I went too far, but thank you. Providing survivor supports, small business development, clean energy development, housing planning, and of course capital investments that touch communities in a lot of ways. We primarily work with the state to provide funding to local governments, nonprofit organizations, and other organizations to help serve and grow their communities. Next slide, please. And so tonight, as you're talking about housing and residential settings for folks who need supportive services, I just kind of want to highlight a little bit here about the range of programs that the Department of Commerce runs through mainly the capital budget. And this can fit from both behavioral health facilities, so very specific care and managed operations that work closely in partnership with the Department of Health and Healthcare Authority around how folks are served, to our housing division that provides a wider variety of residential houses that supports individual tenants. Some of that can be temporary or transitional, or maybe even just a shelter. Some of it is long-term rental or even home ownership opportunities. And we're also, of course, seeing a committed investment by the state in permanent supportive housing, which again is housing for a tenant, but it provides services alongside to keep someone housed and providing the kinds of services that they might need. And these are funded through both state investment of capital dollars, but often layered with partnered funding that comes from other sources, either local, either nonprofit, more traditional financial programming, or through federal programs that we work in close partnership with the Washington State Housing Finance Commission. Next slide, please. And so this is a little specific about two programs that I just wanted to highlight for the committee, both the Behavioral Health Facilities Program that's run, again, specific to facilities in a local community, provide behavioral health supports that works very much in partnership with a healthcare authority, and the Housing Trust Fund, which is really geared towards low-income housing, but provides a variety of supports for people to stay in housing. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn it over to Nate Lichty to talk a little bit more about the Housing Trust Fund specifically, because we're here to talk a little bit more about work that we've been doing serving people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. This has been some housing funding that we provide through the trust fund. This slide really, I want to just note that it represents 35 years of state investment in low income and affordable housing. We have close to 60,000 units now in the portfolio that the state has invested in across the state that maintains affordability for individuals and families across the state in a variety of ways. And for the most part, that $1 of state funding leverages $5 or $6 of other funds in order to make those housing projects go. So I will turn it over to Nate to focus a little bit more on the work at hand.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, chairs, for this opportunity to address you. It's good to see partners such as Mark following, and DSHS on the agenda. So next slide, please. I'll just provide a brief review of how capital investments in housing has grown in the state with major investments in through the Housing Trust Fund. Over the last three biennia, these increases have been about threefold each biennia, really getting to address really critical needs in the community. And the funding has been appropriated in a variety of ways. It's been appropriated to what we call the general or competitive round. And that round is it's multifamily and home ownership. It has a priority of emphasis on getting regional distribution. It has priorities around serving the most vulnerable populations and making sure we get a diversity of project types. And then we've been tasked with delivering a variety of special initiatives, as we characterize them here, related to building types and different housing types that we're trying to pilot or explore, cottage or modular housing construction. And then you'll see the major growth in the last biennial when we stood up and implemented the Rapid Capital Housing Acquisition Program and the Apple Health and Home Capital Program. So we kind of are summarizing those in this vein. They're all administered in a competitive, open process, but they generally have new nuances or special initiatives that we're trying to accomplish with legislative intent. And then we have special population provisos. I separated out housing for persons with developmental disabilities. These are the restrictions that are placed or set-asides that are placed. And it's typically been in the $2 to $5 million range. This biennia, it was $15 million. And then through a partnership with DSHS, it really was able to be expanded this biennia, and I'll share more about that. So that's the overview of our capital programming. The next slide, please. We're very sensitive to the needs of the developmental disability community, and we have been longtime partners with DSHS on having them participate in our reviews, making sure that our partners or housing providers are getting referrals and operating supports through DDA. We are reviewing them. We're reviewing the applications and projects to make sure that they're going to be available to suit and serve the population for 40 to 50 years. And we have been funding and investing in a variety of housing project types, single family, either in sometimes new construction or acquisition and rehab, multifamily, including new construction, and also I have a visual about a project Mark has been helping to pilot at Parkview around a transitional housing or stabilization center. Next slide, please. DDA completed, and I think they'll be speaking to this this housing study that they produced this year, and it was really valuable. We quantified how many of our 55,000 housing units are specifically reserved for the developmentally disabled residents, and we arrived at nearly 1,400 units out of our overall portfolio of units that we've created over the last 35 years. Obviously, the need is far outstrips that available resource. The need for 37,000 housing units statewide is really profound, and it's very important that we're addressing this as a state. Next slide, please. I take just want to highlight this. I mentioned the Dan Thompson Fund. One of the most profound things that occurred in this process for me was the application review process that the Developmental Disabled Committee administered, or council committed or managed in making recommendations to DDA in allocating the Dan Thompson funds. About $50 million was allocated to the Dan Thompson account in 2021. And DDC administered the most inclusive participatory process that I've ever been a part of, including a wide variety of voices and really positive contributions from all manner of stakeholders. And it was really impactful to see. And what they came up with was a recommendation to DSHS that said, we want, of the 15 million of this to go to affordable housing. And DSHS reached out to us, and we said, well, let's work on a partnership to administer these funds and to deliver the housing units. So we've been working for, and we're really excited about the growth and the investment for this biennium. I will note that the average state subsidy per project for IDD unit, often, which is a group home with beds, one bedroom or reservation for a person with disabilities, is on average about $183,000 per unit. It's that's a higher share of state investment that we have on other types of affordable housing. But that's just an observation. That's not in any way a judgment. Next slide, please. These are the projects that we awarded in the 21 to 23 biennium. You see, Parkview was successful in a number of applications. Homes First, Inclusion Housing, and Mercy Housing were the successful applicants, and we awarded these actually just a month ago. So those were just recently announced. A few of them were awarded in 2021, so a few of them are already actually under contract and underway. The next slide, please. In the next slide, I shared the list of the projects that have been referred to us and we are administering for the Dan Thompson funds. And then I have a couple of project-specific slides, examples for you. Next slide, please. Vatis is a new recipient. They came through the Dan Thompson referral, and they're going to be going out to purchase 10 homes with an award of almost $6 million. So it's going to serve exclusively persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And we're excited about, they are an experienced nonprofit, but this is a first-time Housing Trust Fund funding partner. The next slide, please. Another project, kind of on the other side of the spectrum, this is a large multifamily housing development that's proposed for Angle Lake. Mercy Housing is the developer. It's 130 units of housing, and 26 of the units will be reserved for individuals or families with a member of household that's with IDD. This is a great way to leverage some of those tax credit funds, private investments, and this is a transit-oriented development. So it's going to be there at a transit stop to provide really easy access to the whole region with that location. Next slide, please. The third example I have is a very different type. This is one that was a pilot. It's in Gig Harbor. Mark is managing it, so Mark may be speaking to this also. But it is a group training home. This is a stabilization or transitional housing facility that is one in which, you know, our systems aren't exactly set up to recognize or fund. And I know that there's legislative proposals and there's some ideas on the table about how to continue to expand the services in this with this type of housing product. Next slide, please. I'll briefly just talk about the capital budget and how it is been proposed. This includes $305 million of capital funds for housing that are not, I guess, would be allocated upon passage. The second column is $701 million that's represented in Senate Bill 1149 and subject to a referendum. But in this budget, $25 million has been allocated for this population, and we're supportive of a set aside for this and excited about this budget and the prospects for really addressing the affordable housing gap in the state. My last slide, please. So we just have been identifying and working with DSHS and constituents on a range of challenges beyond just the sheer order magnitude of what's needed. And one of those has been around occupancy challenges. The needs of the clientele has changed, and so we've had to work with providers, people that have been of the 1,300 or nearly 1,400 housing units. You know, we work with them over the duration of their commitment to make sure that they're able to provide the quality housing. And so we have frequent modifications and changes, and we're trying to work with them and DSHS on making sure that they have reasonable accommodations and can modify to fit the community and residential needs. We also are anticipating that there's need to develop some standards around durable construction design standards. We have pretty high quality standards, but we also know that we have to streamline and simplify our application. This is universal. This is for all housing providers, but this is a particular felt need for the community serving this population, and we're very attentive to trying to make sure that we're prepared to do that here in lead up to the 2023 application round. We also know that the single family model has been the predominant model, but inclusion in multifamily housing context is also a really important way to help us get to scale. And a number of providers have been thinking about that, have been producing units in that setting, and we want to make sure we have some good programmatic guidelines in place for that. And then the last thing is, going back to kind of Dave's first slide, housing, not all residential types are a fit in the housing trust fund. Some require licensing and some require a facility fund, the Behavioral Health Facilities Fund. And so navigating that and providing good, clear guidelines for communities who are pursuing all types of housing and residential settings that are needed is a real felt need and something we're working proactively to try to address. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation and appreciate your time today. Let me highlight. This isn't a solo effort. We have Brandy Montz is the DDC director. She's a huge resource. She's a team member here at Commerce. Melody Pizzol is also leading the Apple Health and Home office and is a policy expert in this area also. And so a number of team members have helped contribute to the programmatic work that we're doing.
Thanks, Nate. Before we move to Mark, I do have a question, and maybe other committee members do too, but it has to do with the scope of the need and the scale of the funding to match the need. So I'd like to know, sort of, so we can have an idea of, you know, how far behind are we? And you also talked about the fact that the needs have changed. I'd like to know a little bit more about that, please.
Yeah, I can say that we've underfunded affordable housing in our nation for decades, and so I feel that you know, this community is one that has felt that most acutely, and so I think that the housing need that the study that DDA coordinated quantifies that need pretty well. What we're seeing is probably some secondary research that needs to get done is around what are the types of housing options that need to be prioritized to best address the need. Are they, and I think that we're identifying that with the process of deinstitutionalization and moving people to community settings and getting people into the least restrictive environments, that the continuum hasn't been built, the pipeline hasn't been built in all of those areas. And so finding ways to bolster and make sure that people have a continuum of options is really essential. So it's going to be hard to say we just need to build scattered site single family group homes because that'll work. That's not going to work for all, for the whole spectrum of the housing needs. And so that's something I frankly will acknowledge that's a big learning for me to understand how we can help develop policy and programmatic guidelines to fit what Parkview is identifying as a need and what other community agencies are identifying as the need.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee? Not seeing any, so we'll go to Mark. Mark, please begin.
Let's see, thank you for having me. Let's see, I'm going to be speaking from my experience as well, at Parkview's experience in working in this space. My name is Mark Cody. I'm the Executive Director of Parkview Services. Parkview is a nonprofit organization that serves people with IDDs. Parkview Services was formed in 1967 with the first community-based housing for children with IDDs in the state of Washington. I've worked in the IDD development space since 2005. Parkview Services has used Washington State Housing Trust Fund beginning in 1998 to develop safe, secure, and affordable rental housing for extremely low-income people with IDDs. Parkview Services owns and manages the housing it develops. As of December 31, 2022, Parkview has expended $10,353,000 in HDF funds to develop 60 properties and 181 units of affordable rental housing. In addition to rental housing, Parkview Services has expended an additional $4.2 million of HDF funds to support 135 special needs households to become homeowners through its down payment assistance program. There's no doubt that the Housing Trust Fund is a valuable resource that is effective at creating affordable housing in Washington State, and including for people with IDDs. The current HTF leadership is knowledgeable, cares about creating and sustaining affordable housing, and is responsive to stakeholders. That being said, the following are four issues that, in my view, have hampered the production of affordable rental housing for extremely low-income people with IDDs. One, since 2019, Commerce requires that funds awarded to nonprofit developers are structured as interest-bearing loans instead of recoverable grants, which was their practice in prior years. This is a problem because these projects do not cash flow and there is no feasible way to repay the loan. In addition to insufficient cash flow, structuring the awards as a repayable loan requires accruing the interest on the nonprofit developer's books, weakening its financial position. Commerce should structure the funds as recoverable grants for all projects that serve 30% AMI tenants. For example, the folks that we house, people extremely low income with people with IDDs, their main source of income is supplemental security income, which is currently $914 per month. So that's only 12% of the area median income. And we set our rents at 30% of the tenant's income, no matter how low. A typical rent for a 3-bedroom house is $823 a month. Without subsidy, you can see that these don't cash flow, and a typical 3-bedroom home loses about $7,500 per year. Two, Commerce requires developers to sign a note for 100% of the funds awarded, which nullifies any financial incentive to develop affordable housing. Commerce should only recover 90% of the awarded funds. That would provide income for the nonprofit developer that was not offset by a liability. This would strengthen the nonprofit developer's financial position, incentivizing them to develop affordable housing. Three, the multifamily rental applications and scoring criteria are tailored or seem to be tailored to large multi-unit projects that can use tax credits for leverage and use permanently supported housing models that don't work for most extremely low-income people with IDDs. Smaller scattered site housing, single-family homes, duplexes and triplexes work better for this population. Applications should be tailored to these types of projects. Scoring criteria should recognize that scattered site projects cannot leverage tax credits or other private funding sources, and that the cost per unit may be significantly higher than the large multifamily apartment buildings. A large portion of people with IDDs require 24/7 support services in order to live safely and healthfully. So each household requires about 10 or more staff working in shifts, up to 4 staff at a time. So our projects need to have accommodations for parking for the staff, where the larger multifamily projects tend not to have that. And the fourth recommendation is that Commerce allows for costs incurred to develop properties may be reimbursed if they were incurred less than 3 years prior to an award. That, in my view, that time cutoff is too short. It should be on the order of 5 years. This would encourage the developing more projects, housing projects for people with IDDs. For example, Parkview is able to get loan funds to purchase a property before applying to the Housing Trust Fund, and we can, but it may take. So we can purchase property using loans from WCRA and the Housing Finance Commission, and then house the population with the understanding that in a year or two, we would be able to get public funds to take the loan out and then do any necessary rehab. But it could take more than 3 years to get funded from Commerce for some of the projects, and then that would we would not be able to take out the loan, and the project could not be sustained after that. So that's what I have.
All right, well, you had a lot. I saw Dave writing down diligently. So
Okay.
I suspect that we'll be talking more about what changes can be made, to improve efficiencies and to help providers like you build more housing. So Dave is nodding his head, so that's a good sign. I want to thank you very much. Do we have any questions for Mark? Senator Saldana.
Thank you. I just want, it's more comment and appreciation. Mark, I've met you when I worked for Congressman Jim McDermott's office, and we were working on home ownership foreclosure prevention. And just want to thank you for your dedication, for your service all these years, and look forward to figuring out ways that we can build more housing. So thank you, Chair, for allowing me that.
All right, well, thank you very much. We're going to move next to Department of Social and Health Services, Developmental Disabilities Administration, Debbie Roberts, and Shaw Seaman, both virtual. And we're a little behind, so we're going to ask you to maybe move a little faster, if you don't mind. And Debbie, would you please begin?
I certainly will. Good evening, Chair Wilson and Chair Kuderer and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Debbie Roberts, and I'm the DSHS Assistant Secretary for the Developmental Disabilities Administration. And with me today is Shaw Seaman, who is a DDA Office Chief who led the work of the 2 housing reports for DDA. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present the 2022 housing reports today. We go to the next slide, please. As we crafted these 2 reports, we heard from many individuals, and one of our clients, like Zach, who's pictured on the slide, stated that everybody competes for housing. Finding housing is so tough, and we at DDA agree. We also heard the disability community tell us about the one-size-fits-all approach won't meet their needs. The community said we need many kinds of housing, as Nate was talking about before. For DDA clients, scattered site housing means that individuals can live in neighborhoods of their choice based on their unique needs, just like everybody else. The 2022 legislative session produced many opportunities to transform our systems of care through legislative reports and decision packages. And thanks to everybody that played a role in the development of the 2 important housing reports. Much of that work began in 2018 with what was referred to as the Ruckels House Work Group to transform services for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities by increasing the capabilities of community residential settings and redesigning the long-term nature of our intermediate care facilities. As Nate mentioned, we have had the great opportunity to partner with Commerce on the Dan Thompson account and build a system to develop housing through that funding source. It's an innovative interagency agreement between DSHS and the Department of Commerce to benefit individuals who are eligible for services from DDA. And this collaboration includes the Developmental Disabilities Council, and this will fund affordable housing units for this population. Shaw's going to speak to you in the next couple of slides about the content of the 2 housing reports. The first report was called the Housing Priority Report, and that was drafted by DDA. And the second report, the Housing Needs for Individuals with IDD report, was a collaboration between an independent contractor, Eco Northwest, with subject matter expert and DSHS DDA. Both reports involved extensive stakeholdering with advocates, providers, developers, and government partners. So next slide, please. And Shaw, will you please take over?
Sure thing. Thank you, Debbie. And thank you, Chair Wilson and Chair Kuderer. This is, my name again is Shaw Seaman. I'm an office chief with the Developmental Disabilities Administration. And as Debbie mentioned, my office is responsible for affordable housing matters for the Developmental Disabilities Administration. And we did help generate these 2 reports to the legislature in October and December of 22. So I'm just going to kind of give you guys a 40,000-foot view here on a couple of slides. And I want to acknowledge what Nate has said already to Nate Lichty over at Commerce in terms of the collaboration that we've had between DSHS and Commerce this past year has been absolutely incredible and has elevated the attention that people with developmental disabilities who are in need of affordable housing really need to get things to move more than they have in years past, because the need we have right now for affordable housing, you can see right here on this chart, and this again is from the Eco Northwest entity that helped us put this report together. A couple of these data points are directly from DSHS, though. The light blue, 49,000, currently we're running right around 50,000 DDA enrolled clients. And of those, about 1,400 actually currently do reside in affordable housing units developed through the Housing Trust Fund over the past 30 plus years. So it isn't a very big number, and hence the need for us to make more significant investments into the population. As Mark Cody had mentioned, our clients are extremely low income, many of whom depend on SSI, which is around $900 a month. And anybody that lives in King, Pierce, Clark, Spokane, pretty much anywhere now, imagine trying to find a place to rent at market rate with $900 of income each month. And the reason this is important, this is the 40,000 foot that I wanted to share with you guys, and that is our primary community-based residential support system is supported living. And the supported living model is not a facility-based model. And what that means is it does not come with the housing, right? So if there is not affordable, accessible housing, which the vast majority of the time there is not, it creates a significant barrier for our clients coming out of state institutions like RHCs, coming out of hospitals, coming out of psychiatric facilities, that sort of thing, trying to support people. Debbie's going to talk a little bit more about additional barriers related to that, but housing is certainly one of the significant challenges that we're facing. And so this is such an important conversation, and I think it was Chair Wilson at the onset of this talked about how this is very exciting for us to be able to talk in one session about both the services that are needed as well as the housing together, because there is an increased body of research out there all over the country that safe and affordable housing in association with support services, when it's well coordinated, leads to successful outcomes for the people we're here to support. And I've seen that myself when I've gone out and seen our clients move into the affordable housing. If you could experience that and see the looks on their face and the quality of their life go up, it's just phenomenal. So, but these numbers, again, the very large bar here on the left is Eco Northwest's estimate of how many people in Washington State have an intellectual or developmental disability. They estimate that to be at 170,000. And again, DDA has 50,000 enrolled. The 37,000 in yellow is what Eco Northwest has projected as an estimate for the number of people with intellectual developmental disabilities in need of affordable housing in Washington State. So lots of work to do here. Next slide, please. And this is an illustration of, on the left, I think Nate also showed the same slide. We're working from the same book, people, which is a good thing. But the pie chart, I'll just dive in a little bit further. This is basically the last biennium. We were able to get 15 million allocated by the legislature for the DD set aside. That is still a very small piece of the pie, though, in terms of the entire housing trust fund across the board. And that's what this pie chart on the left illustrates. Over on the right, what this is illustrating is the relative number of DD projects that are funded relative to general low-income projects. It's disproportionately low, is basically what that's saying. And this is why we need the technical assistance to support developers to understand the unique needs of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. For example, the accessibility needs. We need roll-in showers from many clients, that are in wheelchairs, accessible ramps, lowered countertops, and increasingly for clients, especially coming out of psychiatric and also the RHCs, they have dual diagnosis, so they have mental health issues. And we need to harden the walls, and we need to be very mindful so that those homes are sustainable for the long haul. And that is best done up front. So that's where the technical assistance in part comes in. So we really tailor the housing to people with developmental disabilities. Next slide, please. Okay, so I just wanted to share with you all real quickly that these are some of the overlapping chief recommendations that came out of the 2 housing reports, again, from October and December. And the number one is increase and prioritize the IDD Housing Trust Fund through Department of Commerce. That is something that the people we support absolutely count on, and every one of those units significantly improves the quality of life for the people that we support with developmental disabilities. And again, the majority of those are in supported living programs or in some cases with families. Most of our community-based programs, I mentioned it before, but the numbers are, we have about 4,000 people in supported living in the community, and there's an estimated need for 3,000 affordable housing units. Our state-operated supported living program, or SOLA, supports about 200 clients in the community, and there's an estimated need for 161 affordable housing units. So many of these clients are living in substandard housing, and our providers do the best they can to try to advocate through just regular market rate landlords to get in there and maintain and do things. But again, they're low income, they're poor, and those are the only houses they can afford. So that need is there. Second, create a separate and distinct housing trust funding round. We feel this is a very good recommendation here because of the unique needs, the complexity of the support services we have. Our federal funders, which provide 50% match for our services, for example, they expect all of this housing to be integrated within the community. And there are home and community-based waiver standards that have to be met. So this is why we feel that a specific application or funding round is needed for people with intellectual disabilities supported through DDA. 3, greater access to grants or forgivable loans. I don't want to be redundant there. I thought Mark Cody, one of our development partners, did a great job talking about grants and the importance of grants. Number 4 has to do with what's in the governor's budget for funding a couple of additional staff. Right now, we have only, within DDA, we have, how many staff do we have? 4,000 staff, Debbie, give or take? Yeah, even more than that. And we have 1 dedicated, affordable, accessible housing staff person. And we've only added them this year. So we really need these 2 positions funded, and this was recommended. It's also in the governor's budget. So I wanted to point that out. And then the last one is our one program manager, Dr. Sheng Fong. This is something that's very near and dear to his heart, and that is he's learned about Washington State affordable housing. There is no statewide database where you can go and identify where the affordable housing is in the state of Washington, universally, across the board. A huge need. It's a need in King County, Pierce County, but all over the state, and one-stop shopping kind of thing. And so that's an important need as well. And with that, let's move to the next slide.
I just want you to know I have a bill for that.
Thank you. Okay, this on to Debbie.
Thanks, Shaw. The housing crisis, the workforce crisis, and that increasing clinical complexity of the population we serve are all interconnected. And do impact other parts of our overall system. So housing and staffing shortages have impacts on the ability to transition individuals quickly from institutional settings like the RHCs, state hospitals, acute care hospitals. As an example, supported living, as we've mentioned, is a key waiver service provider of residential habilitation services and supports to individuals in the community in their own home. So as Shaw mentioned, it's not a facility model, and often as individuals are trying to transition out of some of these institutional settings, and also even from their parents' homes, supported living has the task of finding housing and staffing to support the unique needs of the person transitioning. Without the affordable, accessible, and safe community housing, delays in transitions occur. Without adequate staffing, delays occur. And without experienced staffing, supporting individuals with clinical complexities to transition usually means a delay. And one of the factors around the experienced staffing is there has been a lot of turnover in the last few years, and there's a lot of recruitment issues. We're losing the expertise of the highly trained staff to other industries. Providers in both contracted and state-operated supported living and our employment industry are challenged with retaining staff who have the training and experience working with individuals with complex needs. Turnover rates in supported living, although they're down since 2021 when it was reported to be at about 78%, are still high at around 50% turnover. And this is the same for our state operated as well as our contracted providers. And we're also hearing that the providers are only seeing in many areas, they invite applicants to an interview and only about 20% of the individuals are showing up. In some areas it's better than that, but we've had it reported about 20% of the applicants are showing up for interviews. So in the governor's budget, you're going to see the children and adults in hospital request, which requests funding to provide supports to improve staff retention through targeted training and recruitment supports to better serve clients with complex needs in their communities, which will help to avoid unnecessary and extended hospitalizations. Next slide, please. So we will stop here. I am so grateful that we had the opportunity to present, and thank you so much for your support. Shaw and I are available for any questions you may have.
Thank you so much. Well, I do have one. I'm looking at the graph that shows the IDD Housing Trust Fund set-aside amount at 15 million, and then there's 345 million left. How much do you think that set-aside amount should be?
I don't, I think you're going to have some folks advocating for that after us. I'm not sure that there's something in the governor's budget that I can refer to right now.
I think the governor's budget had 10 million for the housing trust fund and then an additional 15 million that was referendum dependent. So 25 million. But yes, everybody has a strong opinion on this question and we need to be careful to tread softly here.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. But I thought maybe you would say something that I could use. All right. Well, thank you. Anybody else have any questions? All right, thank you. We're going to move to our community perspective now. We have in person, we have Stacy Dim and Scott Livengood. And on deck, we'll have Kathy Murahashi and Ginger Kwan. And then after that, we'll have Julie Clark. So Stacy and Scott, come on up.
Actually, if it's okay, Kathy Murahashi and I are sharing a PowerPoint. It'd be good if we could
totally
go together.
Fine.
Let's
totally
go.
Fine.
Thank you.
We get a twofer.
Yeah.
All right, great. Go ahead.
Great. Good evening. My name is Stacy Dim, and I live in the 37th in Seattle, and I work for the ARC of Washington State, seated in the 10th District in Olympia. I am also a sibling. I have a sister with Down syndrome who actually happens to live in one of the original referendum group homes in Issaquah that we created in the 80s through a big public referendum toward DD housing. So I have a little bit of family perspective on the housing situation. And I'm really grateful to be here tonight. Just to let you know, the ARC promotes and protects the human and civil rights of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, ensuring their full inclusion in the community throughout their lifetimes. And I love our mission. I'm here to make sure that we inform and educate you all about the enduring potential and inherent value of people with developmental disabilities and how critical it is that we see them as valued members in our society and in the community. And housing is a big part of that. So thank you for letting us speak to it. I just want to remark in listening to our partners in Commerce and DDA, you know it's bad when advocates are here to tell you we're all agreeing on this issue. There are many things you're going to see that are similar to what you've just seen tonight and some of the comments we're going to make. So thank you. Second slide, please. So housing is one of the most complicated issues that I've worked on in my career in developmental disabilities. So it's not surprising that it is complicated for you to navigate with us. When we talk about housing, I think it's important to remember we always have to talk about three things together. The brick and mortar that create that living environment that should be supportive of as much independence and care as possible and be within that person's financial ability. the services and supports that we need to live successfully that typically come through those home and community-based waivers that you've talked about and heard about so much, and then the need for a caregiving workforce that has to be strong. All three of these have to occur together to live in the community successfully. And when any of these things are weak, things fall apart and people go into crisis, as we've seen happening over the past few years. Next slide, please. Almost all people, as you've heard, with developmental disabilities live on SSI. They rely on this government program with a monthly allowance of around $900 now. This places people with developmental disabilities at below 30% AMI, which again, I don't think I can say this enough, the federal category of extremely low income, which basically means low income housing is unaffordable for our individuals. It also, you have to remember, they cannot save more than $2,000 total for assets, which makes it extremely difficult to move, to have first and last month's rent and a deposit and all the costs associated with doing that. A developmental disability is a lifelong disability that significantly affects several major life areas. It begins in childhood and it lasts a lifetime. 30 to 40% of our people with developmental disabilities have co-occurring mental health diagnoses. And our state system right now, as you've heard, is really only funded to serve the most severe individuals, severely impacted individuals. So we often have a lot of people who have to live alone or in specialized settings in order to appropriately support their needs. Next slide, please. As Shaw pointed out, by census, we estimate that about 170,000 people live in Washington state with developmental disabilities. Unfortunately, you can see that dramatic shift. Only 50,000 people have sort of made it through that gateway for eligibility. And less than that are served, less than 1/3 of those individuals. About half are children at any given time, but 28,000 are adults who will eventually need to live outside their family home. It is important to recognize that families are the long-term care system for people with developmental disabilities in our state. Nearly 80% of people with developmental disabilities live with their families their entire lives. We have about 2,100 people that we know of with developmental disabilities living with senior caregivers. Those are parents routinely caring for children in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. In our current system, families have no way to plan for their son or daughter's future when they're no longer able to care for their loved one. Next slide, please. As you've heard, the legislature ordered 2 really important studies. We were involved in getting those studies put together with previous leaders in our legislature, and we are happy to share this slide that you've also seen, just slightly differently. And we want to make sure that you know there are 37,000 adults through these studies that have an unmet housing need. And they're all looking to those 1,382 units of set aside that have been created to fulfill their housing need. We know that that can't happen and we need greater capacity. The legislature has funded between $3 and $5 million a biennium, growing our housing stock by just a handful of units each year. So we have a lot of catch up to do. Next slide, please. It's become increasingly obvious that housing, finding brick and mortar homes that someone on SSI can afford at $300 a month, is a growing barrier. Even when services and workforce are not an issue, the barrier right now is lack of housing. This is causing an increase in hospital boarding, and I'm sure you've seen some of the front page stories on the Seattle Times, inappropriate inpatient boarding and unnecessary long-term stays in our RHCs and nursing homes. In the last few years, we've seen a decrease in new developments in the Housing Trust Fund DD set aside, although Nate did a great job of showing some of the ways that we're starting to improve that with our relationship with Commerce and bringing more awareness to some of the barriers that developed over the last few years that Mark mentioned. Our projects are often smaller, which means developers don't benefit from tax credits and the units are more expensive to build, so we don't perform well by Commerce standards. And that has made it difficult for us to compete with big developers and to get our projects out and about. It also means that it generates no revenue for nonprofits who need operational and maintenance funds to be long-term and sustainable. Next slide, please. Our needs are not met by one model of housing, as you've heard. Generally, they're also not met by the housing models through our large efforts recently to house people with behavioral support needs or who are homeless or unhoused. We need services at the same time, and often the services, for example, in permanent supportive housing, are not enough to support the needs of people with developmental disabilities. So we need those services through home and community-based waivers to lay on top of that brick and mortar. When we talk with benevolent developers, big developers like Mercy Housing, and they say, great, we want to help out, where do you want 400 units for people with developmental disabilities? By the time you add on those services, that looks like an institution, right? So it works better for us to have integrated homes throughout the community that meet our needs. And that looks like single-family homes, duplexes, and triplexes primarily. There are some set-asides and larger complexes that may work for some people with developmental disabilities, but often those are not accessible enough. They don't come with durable materials. There's no room for staff support, for medical equipment, noise mitigation, appropriate roommate matching, staff parking, and often don't have the right kind of transit and transportation access. For families who are caring for their sons and daughters well into their retirement years as well, income is truncated. Often one parent must drop out of the workforce to care for their adult son or daughter, meaning that families also need access to low-income housing that accommodates the needs of their son or daughter with developmental disabilities. We need DD housing vouchers, we need down payment assistance programs, homeownership assistance, and you'll hear from Ginger Kwan about some other models for those families that are going to provide long-term care as long as they possibly can. Next slide, please. Our reality is that housing is more expensive because we need smaller projects that serve smaller numbers of people per unit. We need to ensure that developers don't have to pay back loans when they can't charge back enough for rent, and that grants are better suited for our smaller developments. We agree with that strongly. Next slide, please. We have not made a large-scale investment in housing that meets the needs of people with developmental disabilities in the community since we were deinstitutionalizing in the 1980s. At that time, we had a very large referendum to build group homes that are still around today, as you've heard about. They're aging, they're still performing with some fundraising, but we've learned a lot and we need to move on from just that model. We need caseload forecasting for those waiver services to match up with housing, and we need rate setting for workforce, and you'll hear a little bit more about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stacy.
1 second, we have a question for you, Stacy. Senator Frame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Stacy, you mentioned in your comments about folks can't have more than $2,000 of assets, and I think I know why, but I think our folks watching tonight would benefit from an explanation of why that's the case.
Yeah, that's a limitation in the SSI program. It isn't a federally set standard. So if you go over $2,000 in your asset, you'll get cut off from SSI and Medicaid, which is pretty critical. So you cannot save more than $2,000 and have that.
And for the folks watching at home, SSI stands for?
Supplemental Security Income.
Thank you, Stacy.
That's a federal poverty program for people with disabilities.
Senator Wilson had one first. Senator Wilson?
Thank you, Madam Chairs. You had a slide just a moment ago on, and it was captivating, great presentation, talks about your housing is expensive, and I understand the quality and the care for the smaller unit. Is there a general statement, it's kind of a bold question, that the smaller housing is still more expensive than the larger housing? Was there a correlation on that, or is it just the care is going to be expensive regardless?
We're more expensive when you look at a 400-unit complex that's built by these larger developers. So, right, they're looking for serving the most people in the least expensive way possible, which is why our numbers look more expensive. But when you think about a single-family home or duplex or triplex that has those requirements that we talked about, durable materials, bigger rooms that are more accessible, room for equipment, other living, it is going to be a little more. And I think that Nate actually had an average cost of some of our single-family homes.
And thank you for clarifying that. I love the support on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Trudeau.
Thank you. I had a question about the housing vouchers. So having navigated a local housing voucher, which automatically assumed that a teenage boy and a mom with disabilities should be on the same, in a one room, it was stunning to me. There is a question in here. But but it was stunning to me because then they were told, well, in order to get, approved for an additional room, then you have to go back and you have to show like a note from your doctor or a note from something else, even though both folks were documented as having pretty serious disabilities. So I'm curious, the DD voucher that you're talking about, this would be something brand new and something that you would see like alongside. How would that work with sort of the current voucher system and we can talk in ideals. I'm just curious because having experienced that limitation with local vouchers, I was like, this is not serving, yeah.
I'm going to let Kathy talk about it more, and Scott, but these are vouchers that are already available that really are just prioritized for people with developmental disabilities to make up for that market rate difference of $300 a month. And so that they have more options to move in, but they're very few and far between. They're very hard to get. But Kathy has a great deal of experience navigating that, so I'll let her comment more.
So when we talked about, there's not a DD voucher. We're talking about the federal vouchers, Section 8 vouchers. So does that clarify it for you?
It does, and I know there are there's a lot of limitations with the Section 8 voucher in multiple ways. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Is that it? Okay. Okay, I'll go forward.
Next slide for Kathy.
Next slide. Good evening, my name is Kathy Murahashi, and I live in the 41st District. I'm the Education and Outreach Manager at Community Homes. Community Homes provides, promotes, and sustains exceptional community-based housing for individuals with IDD. We currently own 8 DD-specific adult family homes and 2 shared living homes. My job is to provide education, navigation, and support to families who are seeking housing. I'm also the mother of a 34-year-old young woman who has IDD and lives with me. Thanks Stacy for giving us an overview of the challenges of the bricks and mortar part of housing. I'm going to talk more about the support services needed for housing. On this slide, it just shows you the main housing options available to individuals with IDD. There's a handout that gives definitions to each of these. I would encourage you to look at those. The one that's not on there is shared living, which is not really a DD option. It's kind of it's where families put things together themselves. There's also a handout that shows where people live and the cost of each model. Note that the data is from a point in time and may vary slightly from what the information that Scott will be sharing, since he has more updated information. Services to live in housing, with the exception of adult family homes, comes via Medicaid home and community-based service waivers. When individuals with disabilities accept waiver services, they waive their right to an institutional placement to receive services in the community. And each waiver has a unique set of services. So next slide. This chart shows what housing models are available on each of our DD waivers and the number of people on each waiver. Those first 2 columns are mostly children. And then we have our basic plus waiver and our core waiver and then community protection waiver. It's important to understand, when you look at the core waiver, you see a lot of options, which is great. But it's important to understand, folks on the core waiver mostly are receiving that waiver are people who are in an extreme crisis, coming out of hospitals and RHCs. The original intent of supported living was to serve a variety of individuals, not just high-need individuals. Because the legislature has not invested in individuals like my daughter, who are more independent and have a job in the community, and is only taking those higher needs clients, the cost of supported living has increased dramatically. The majority of those individuals living at home with their senior families are on that Basic Plus waiver. And there you'll see just two options. An adult family home, which is actually not a DDA housing model, and it's not actually on our waiver. It's not a waiver service. It's part of our larger Medicaid 1115 waiver. Adult family homes can be a great model, but they're not appropriate for everyone, and especially for those who may be more independent. Adult family homes are often, few of them take Medicaid, and there are very few DD-specific AFHs, probably less than 50 across the state. The majority of AFHs are for the elderly. At community homes, we have about 180 individuals on our wait list to be in one of our homes. So please note that the governor's budget has funding for a pilot project to develop DD-specific housing, which we support, and we also support the AFH collective bargaining agreement. The other option is shared living, and again, that's the unofficial model where families piece together housing themselves through the use of housing vouchers and personal care services and other benefits like SNAP. So those, for all those senior families, those are your options. Next slide. So let's look a little closer at that Basic Plus waiver and what the services are. So there's kind of these three silos again. You can receive respite, but that's only for individuals who live in their family home. There's employment and day services. There's some other services, and then there's this column called aggregate services, which is about $6,200 a year total. You should know the average expenditure per client per month for folks on the Basic Plus waiver is about $715. And that includes all those services, the employment and respite, compared to residential, which is about $14,000 per month. There really are not any services here on this waiver that are specific to housing. Aggregate service is the only place in the Basic Plus that really potentially could provide some housing supports through a service called specialized habilitation or community engagement. Families need education. They need help planning and navigating the system. They need help facilitating housing. Aggregate services would be a great place to add some additional services that could address some of those needs. As you can see, there's really little in the Basic Plus waiver, particularly in aggregate services, to support and mostly importantly sustain housing. Particularly, you know, for some, if families are putting things together through shared living, for after when parents are no longer able to do that. Consider the connection between the lack of housing services on that Basic Plus waiver and individuals going into crisis. That's where they're stuck. DDA and CMS often emphasize person-centered and self-determined services. And this is what individuals and families want. But this is the reality. You can't be person-centered when you don't have any options. Families want assurance that when they are no longer here, their loved one will be well cared for. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think it's very clear that we have work to do. Please proceed.
Good evening. I'm Scott Livengood. I am the CEO of Alpha Supported Living Services, a nonprofit supported living provider serving people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in supported living settings in King, Snohomish, and Spokane counties. And I live in the 45th district. I've worked in the field of supported living for 30 years now. and I've been in my role at Alpha for 22 years. Just back in 2015, seeing the need and lack of developers for affordable housing, we formed an LLC, Inclusion Housing, and have developed some houses since then, and we were listed on the list that Nate had for this current funding cycle. So I am your grizzled veteran for supported living and your newbie for housing trust funds. So I'll try to set the table with a little bit about services, then get into housing. So next slide, please. So supported living, they've talked a little bit about it, but in supported living, we are contracted with DDA and we are certified through RCS, which is a little complicated, but means that our funding comes through DDA appropriated by all of you in the legislature. It's a wide range of services, but in supported living, the services are paid directly to the agency, and we then hire the staff and provide the support. The individual client pays their own rent, utilities, groceries from their own living expenses, which is why we talk about housing here. There's about 4,300 people served in supported living, with just under 400 of those being in community protection programs. Next slide, please. You hear some people reference group homes. Group homes are the older model of service that the state used to do back in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s. Some of us, like Alpha, have been around forever, and so we still have some group homes, but there's only about 200 people served in group homes currently. The state is not developing new group homes. They are basically grandfathering in those have done them for years. They are larger settings, 5 to 8 people in a home. They are licensed through RCS, whereas supported living is not a licensed setting. The services are very similar. Really, the only difference is licensing, the size of the facility, and the fact that the clients don't pay rent, utilities, all those things. Instead, they pay towards their cost of care to the organization. And then included in community residential is the children's out-of-home services. Just over 100 children are served in that program, and Alpha does have a licensed children's program as well. Next slide, please. So as far as what services are provided in community residential, in supported living, which I always think is my elevator speech when someone asks me, what do you do? So the services are individualized. I mean, I serve over 200 people in our supported living program at Alpha, and every single person has their own plan, their own goals, everything is individualized, and every rate is individualized for the person. The level of care and acuity is similar to those in the RHC institutional setting or SOLA. It's a high acuity level care. And the thing that always resonates with people is we serve about 204 people currently. I have 840 employees. So that's how intensive the model is. So those supports cover everything that comes up in a person's life. It's 24/7 care. So it can be personal care, medications, healthcare appointments, transportation, going out in the community, but also behavior supports, behavior intervention, and just informal counseling. It's everything that comes up in a person's life. What we've seen grow exponentially over the last decade is more and more people are coming into service with an accompanying mental health diagnosis. The data is saying that over 40% of clients at our agency, over 54% of the clients served have an accompanying mental health diagnosis. Next slide, please. So just a comparison of the numbers when we look at the 3 settings I talked about. Supported living is the largest component. 87% of the clients at that level of care are served in supported living setting. The average daily cost, the average daily reimbursement is about $573 per client per day. SOLA programs are about 4% of the individuals served, and the average daily cost is over $1,100 per client per day. Whereas the RHCs are around 9% of those served, and the average daily cost per client is over $1,400 per client per day. Now, am I trying to say that supported living is just a cheap model and is the way to do it? What I'm really trying to say is supported living is underfunded, and that's why you're seeing high turnover and a workforce issue. Next slide, please. So what is the impact of that funding? So first and foremost, what you've heard already is in 2021, at the height of the pandemic, we had 78% turnover. When you're working with people who may have autism, a mental health diagnosis, some behavioral challenges, to have 78% of your staff leave in 1 year and new people coming in makes it extremely difficult. Consistency is what is needed. Continuity of care is what's needed. We have since, with a rate increase, returned to normal. What is normal? 50% turnover. So 50% turnover is sort of the normal in our industry. But the other thing of what that's impacted is the number of people served. You'll see that red line is the number of people served in supported living over the last 2.5 years. It's steadily gone down. So we've lost capacity. Fewer and fewer people served. There's over 200 fewer served. That blue line is the target that DDA sets when they set the budget. There was that 1 month when it dropped. That was to try to line up with what they're forecasting going forward. Those spots are there for people to be served. There's currently over 300 individuals approved for services and referred out. It's just the providers are having a workforce issue and trying to staff up to serve them. So what is needed? Next slide, please. First and foremost is stabilize the supported living workforce, provider network, consistent and predictable Medicaid funding. That doesn't mean 1 year getting a 10% increase, the next year getting 0, and the next year getting 1%. It needs to be consistent so we can have a stable workforce. Second is regular formal caseload forecasting so we can actually look to the future and figure out what's needed. So when you're looking at your 2-year budgets and forecasting 4 years, you can predict what is needed looking forward. And then lastly, what I'll go into in more depth is lower the barriers to affordable housing and help other providers come to the table to develop that housing. Next slide, please. So tying it all together, what a few people have said is, those in supported living are not just low income, it's extremely low income, an average of $914 per month. And as Mark referenced earlier, if you're looking at setting the rent at 30% of what someone makes and you're looking at a 3-person home, I just highlighted some of the counties there on what the average 3-person home would be and how much someone would actually be able to pay and what is needed. There's a huge deficit there. So that is something that in the end, the state ends up paying because we're able to put forward insufficient income requests to the state to say they can't afford their rent, you need to pay it. So that comes back to the state in one form or another, or we're just having more people live together than can actually afford to live together. So that's an issue going forward. Next slide, please. So highlighting our agency and sort of what we've done. We've not solved the problem. I'm not going to tell you I have, but we've looked at several different ways to address the situation. One is expanding affordable housing options. We formed our own LLC to try to develop some housing. So it was formed in 2015. We currently have 8 homes through that program. We added 2 in 2021 when we actually used some referendum $29 from referendum $29 when we sold a property that we had from the late 70s, move that covenant over to the new homes and keep that covenant in place for those homes. And then our Housing Trust Fund and ARCH applications were approved this December, so we will be developing 4 new homes in the coming year or so. The remaining people we serve, we have them in group training homes. We've worked with Parkview and Inland Empire and others so that they get houses and the clients that we serve move into them. We have some apartment units where we have people live there as well. About 31 houses are through open market landlords. And then we have looked at partnerships with some of those large developers, Imagine Housing, TWG, to get some set-aside units. What I will say is we will never turn that opportunity away because it is affordable housing. Those are the hardest units for us to serve. It's not a one-size-fits-all model. For some people, I'm sure it's ideal. But when you're serving someone with autism, challenging behavior, property destruction, living in a large building with shared walls is not ideal. Next slide, please. So as far as the Housing Trust Fund and housing, some of the things that we are looking for and what we truly need is the development of scattered site, single-family homes, duplexes, triplexes. That's what works best, and that's what we need. It may be more important, but it is what works best in supported living. You will hear from Ginger and perhaps others about some other settings, and that's perfect. That's perfect for them and what works for them. But the individuals in supported living do need a little bit more privacy and some space between neighbors to make it work. Funding needs to be in the form of grants, not deferred loans. We are right now taking sort of the risk to accept some of the funding and make a commitment to repay it in 40 or 50 years. But without a revenue stream coming in, we really can't afford to repay those loans. We need to simplify the application. When I said I am one of the newbies as far as Housing Trust Fund, the application is daunting and most ran away from it. And it needs to be simplified if you want to have more developers come to the table. It should include ongoing operating expenses because a one-time grant or one-time loan isn't going to cut it when you have ongoing maintenance and oversight expenses. And then just increase the DD set-aside allocation. And Chair Kuderer, I believe you asked really early on, like, what are you asking for? There is a capital request this time to increase that amount to $40 million instead of the typical $3 to $5 million. And when we did some basic numbers as far as what we currently have, that I think 1,384, it would increase that by about 15%. So it would make a nice, stride forward in that. So, and that's what I have. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Do we have any questions for this panel? All right, not seeing any, thank you. And we'll now call on Ginger Kwan and Julie Clark. And I think Julie is via Zoom. She was here a little earlier. Ginger, why don't you just start? Thank you, good to see you.
Hey, the slideshow, please. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good evening. Thank you so much for giving this time to be here with you, Senators. My name is Ginger Kwan. I am the Executive Director of Open Doors for Multicultural Families, but most importantly, I am a parent. My son, Mikkel, he is 27 years old and he has autism. He still lives with me, a very happy young man, but needs a lot of support. So all the support services that, Kathy or Scott and also Stacy, they mentioned, it is no difference. But what I'm here today want to share with you is different perspective from the diverse community that we have served. So Open Doors for Multicultural Families was formed in 2009 at my basement because there was just no services that are designed to meet the needs of the diverse community members who have developmental disabilities and their families. So for that reason, we started Open Doors in 2009. And fast forward annually, now we are serving close to 1,000 households who all have IDD members in their family, and over 2,500 people are the ones who we have served. And today, first of all, I want to share with you what we have talked with our community, and they share with us their ideas and their hope and dreams about housing and related services. And then also want to share with you a project we boldly taken and have never been done before and still are very struggling trying to make it work, and want to share with you how our project can meet the population we are serving. And again, this is one of the options, because we know housing is a complex issue. Not everybody's needs are different, right? Everybody's needs are different, and so we need to consider and, not like either or. And people with disabilities, if we value them, then we need to provide different options for them. So next slide, please. So we have done this community assessment for almost 9 months to really understand their needs in 2021. Next slide, please. And we have done 2 parts of the assessment. One part is through the focus group. You can see that we did 24 focus group, a total of 189 people come to the focus group, and in 11 different language groups. We survey parents, people with developmental disabilities, and providers, and some providers. Next one, please. We also have done the survey because many people were not able to come to the event. So we actually translated all the questionnaires in their different languages and then text them. So they are not only can use their phone to access our survey, but also through the internet, whatever, and our email, they can do it. And total, we have get a feedback from 290 parents, and that include 388 people in this household. And then we can also see that there are 53 individuals who have developmental disabilities also provided their feedback, and also 11 service providers. Next slide, please. And just to give you some ideas, in King County, average household size is 2.45 in 2021, and yet more than 2/3 of the respondents who responded back to us have more than, have more than 2/3 of them have more than, you can see that more than 3 or 4 people in their household. So that means when we think about the diverse community that we are serving, their needs for 3-bedroom or even 4-bedroom are so needed. But often we just don't see the 4-bedroom. So, we can settle down for 3 if you give us more. Next one, please.
Ginger, I'm really sorry to say this, but we have a hard stop at 8, and we have 3 bills to hear, and it's 7:25. We have one more speaker. Could you maybe tell us the most important things you want us to tell? And plus, we do have your slides, and we're more than happy to meet with you individually to talk about, your needs and your suggestions for how we can improve the process.
Okay. In this case,
How about the project? Can we advance and you show?
Let's advance to the project.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's
we can
critically
advance to the
important.
bottom.
I hate to do this, but that's the most exciting part, I think, when we look at options.
Okay. How about this? Let's just play the video, a 4-minute video to show you what we intended to build. Okay, let's go to the slides, continue, move forward. Okay, next one, here. Okay, if you click on the video illustrating vision here for Multicultural Village.
Excellent.
Oh, no, you have to click on the, Yep.
Embedded in there. Here we go. Awesome.
Oh, please let the audio work.
I think we're having some technical difficulties. I'm so sorry.
No, what you have to do is just you close it, and then before you share, click on the sound. You activate the sound, and then you will come out. So while they are trying to do that, I just want to share with you, this model is based on the community's needs, and we want to make it a very inclusive environment that everybody can be there. It's not an institution, totally different. There are wraparound services, easy access for everybody, and bring communities together, and this is crucial.
Thank you, and I think we have it.
All around the world. Open Doors for Multicultural Families has a vision to create a multicultural village, an inclusive residential community located within a mixed-use development, which will offer a variety of amenities and services. The physical and programmatic design of the village will center people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but will also support people of all abilities. As this is a unique residential model not currently found in the general marketplace, we share this story as a way to illustrate the connectedness of its residents. Bill is a 34-year-old man with intellectual and developmental disabilities. He has lived all his life with his parents until moving into the Multicultural Village, an inclusive community for individuals and families who are BIPOC or have intellectual and developmental disabilities.
located adjacent to a light rail station. Bill has lived at the village for 3 years, ever since it first opened. It's a crisp fall day. Bill wakes up early, eager to start his day. He showers and eats his breakfast in his daylit-filled kitchen. And at 9:45, he walks out of his home and runs into Kareem, who is also leaving his home. "Hey man," Kareem calls out. "Are you walking to the station?" Bill asks. To which Kareem says yes, and they walk over to the light rail station, as they do every weekday. "I didn't see you yesterday. Where were you?" Kareem inquires. "I had a doctor's appointment," Bill explains. "Everything okay?" Kareem asks. "Yes, just a checkup," says Bill. As they near the station, Kareem says goodbye to get on the train, and Bill walks to his job at the grocery store, where he is a courtesy clerk. He really enjoys bagging his groceries. He prides himself on packing the bags efficiently, but keeping them light enough to carry without having to double up the bags. His customers like this as it's easy to carry them from the car into the house, and the store likes it also because it reduces the waste of bags. After his shift, Bill walks over to the community center where he works out. The receptionist, Mi-kyung, a woman with intellectual and developmental disabilities herself, welcomes him. "Hi, Bill. Nice to see you today," she says warmly. She works there every weekday afternoon and is a welcome face to all who visit the center. After his workout, Bill walks home and sees Sophia exiting the Early Learning Center with her twin boys. Sophia lives at the end of the hall from Bill, and he often sees them at the universally designed playground. While Bill is older than most on the playground, he enjoys swinging. So he goes whenever he can to swing for 20 to 30 minutes. And thus, he has become friends with the twins, Manny and David. Bill offers to take Sophia's bags so she can hold Manny and David's hands. They are, after all, squirmy 4-year-olds, and they're prone to running off at very inconvenient times. As they walk upstairs, Sophia asks if Bill is going to the community dinner. Their floor has nightly dinners for whomever wants to join, and Bill says yes, noting that it's Taco Tuesday. At dinner, Bill sits with Abdi and his wife Uba. Abdi is in a wheelchair, so there is a designated table for him, with lots of clearance to maneuver, and it's away from the main traffic flow. It's also a quieter table, which is why Bill likes to sit with them. He's able to focus on the conversation and is less distracted by others. After dinner, he watches TV with a few others in the lounge and returns home by 9 p.m. to get ready for bed. As he crawls under the covers, he notes on his clock that it's exactly 9:30. He is grateful for the good day and looks forward to the same tomorrow.
Okay. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer you. And if not,
Senator Trudeau has a question.
thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm actually very interested in what you put together. I think especially when you think about new immigrant families, right, that really, I think, seek that cultural connection and community. That's already an issue. And then on top of that, you add on the layer of isolation that sometimes having a family member or caring for a family member, depending on their needs, can be. So I want to thank you. And I think I speak for all the committee members in appreciating, and apologies that we couldn't get to your presentation, but I would love if we could chat offline about this project.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah, we need the support because this has never been done before. And to support our community, their fundings has to be set aside and to be integrated. And I'm open to talk to any one of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ginger.
Can I just say too, Ginger, and the work Ginger does and the open doors for multicultural families is beyond what anyone can imagine. And I know any one of us would be happy to be invited to come visit because the work that Open Doors does and the work with families and the connections with the individuals is well worth your time. And she's been in that community and worked in our community for a very, very long time. So please take her up on that offer. And again, I'm so happy to have you here tonight and wish we had way more time to talk about something that's way so important to all of us. So thank you.
Yes, okay, so our final speaker tonight is Julie Clark, at least for the working session. Julie, you've been waiting very patiently. Thank you, and please begin.
Hello, self-advocates and community partners. My name is Julie Clark, and I live in Lacey, a part of the 22nd District. I have cerebral palsy. I am a self-advocate and love to advocate for people to be able to live in the community. I was at Western State Hospital for 3 months in 2001. CoCula is a residential provider, and they got me out of the hospital in September of that year and put me into my apartment with day and evening caregivers. I was in an independent living program. In the program, my caregivers cooked and cleaned for me. I was able to come and go as I pleased. As I aged, I could not take care of myself. I needed to have 24-hour care. So, CoCula placed me in a shared home that CoCula runs. I had a roommate who was yelling all the time. My roommate would assault the caregivers. Being in the shared home was not safe for me. In November 2019, I moved to an apartment in Lacey with CoCula's help. I get 24-hour care. A nurse comes to check up on me because my hair is fine. I have a feeding tube, vest chest compression machine, and hair lift. My caregivers go everywhere I go. It is nice to be living on my own again. I was in and out of the hospital with pneumonia for the last 6 months of 2019. Shelley Corson is a nurse that CoCula hired. She has taught me how to breathe better. I have not been to the hospital overnight with Shelley's help since January 2020. I enjoy living in the community because I can choose what I want to do. I like being able to go to my church, the United Churches of Olympia, in which I've been a member of for 13 years. I like to go to movies, visit parks, and do music-related activities. I like to hang out with my boyfriend and other friends in my community. I also enjoy visiting with my family. I encourage you to advocate to your legislators for more community housing options, residential services, and a stronger provider workforce so others can enjoy living in the community as well. Thank you for listening. Hello, committee members. My name is Julie Clark, and I live in Lacey, the part of the 22nd District. I have cerebral palsy.
I think it started over. Julie, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I think tonight has been very, very informative with everyone who's participated. And I think it's shown a real need in our state. And I'm glad that we had this opportunity for this working session. I want to thank Senator Wilson for agreeing to do this. I think it was, like I said, I think it was a big eye-opener for a lot of us up here. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Senator Wilson for the rest of the hearing, and thank you all again.
I will tell you, we are going to speak through 3 bills, which we're going to hear tonight. And what you'll know is you may have signed in to testify, and we may not be able to call you up, but please know you can always submit your testimony electronically and or let me know, give me a call, and be happy to talk it through with you. But want to make sure that we get the bills